My wife declared we're polyamorous. After meeting a guy at a retreat, I said, then enjoy it. Now she's one of 4 and begging for monogamy back. Looking back, I can see how the foundations of our 10-year marriage started cracking the moment Nicole chose that wellness conference over our anniversary trip. We'd been planning wine country for months, had the boutique hotel booked, the vineyard tour scheduled, everything mapped out to celebrate a decade together, but 3 weeks before our departure, she announced she needed to attend a 4-day holistic wellness conference in Sedona instead because her coworker had dropped out and there was a non-refundable spot available. Jordan, this is important for my personal growth, she'd said, scrolling through the conference website on her phone while I stared at our anniversary reservations on my laptop screen, and something in her tone made it clear this wasn't really a discussion but a decision she'd already made. When she returned from Sedona, I barely recognized the woman who walked through our front door. Gone were her business casual clothes and practical jewelry, replaced with flowing fabrics, multiple crystal necklaces layered around her neck, and wooden bracelets that clicked together when she moved her arms. She hugged me differently too, this long, swaying embrace while breathing deeply, then pulled back to look into my eyes with an intensity that made me uncomfortable, like she was seeing through me to something I couldn't understand. I need to clear the energy in here, she announced, producing a bundle of Palo Santo from her bag and lighting it before I could even process what was happening, the smoke filling our living room while she walked in circles muttering about stagnant vibrations and unconscious patterns. I'd prepared her favorite dinner for her return, salmon with that lemon butter sauce she always requested for special occasions, but when I brought her to the dining room where I'd set everything up with candles and flowers, she shook her head sadly like I'd disappointed her somehow. I can't eat this, Jordan, I'm on a vibrational cleanse. Zane says consuming anything below a certain frequency will disrupt my energetic realignment, she explained, and that was the first time I heard his name, delivered with a reverence that made my stomach tighten. She spent the entire evening on her phone, typing rapidly with a small smile playing at her lips, occasionally laughing at something on the screen while I ate alone, and when I asked who she was texting, she said it was just the Awakened Collective group chat, people from the conference who really understood the work they were doing. Over the next few days, our conversations became increasingly bizarre as Nicole peppered every sentence with phrases I'd never heard her use before. She talked about conscious uncoupling from societal constructs, decolonizing her mind-body connection, and releasing attachment to outdated paradigms, all while constantly checking her phone for messages that made her face light up in ways my presence no longer seemed to. She transformed our spare bedroom into what she called a sacred space, hanging tapestries and arranging crystals on every surface, burning incense that made the whole house smell like a head shop, and spending hours in there with the door locked doing integration work that apparently required complete silence and privacy. The breaking point came exactly 1 week after her return when she asked me to sit down in our home office for what she called an important conversation about our evolutionary path together, and the formality of her request combined with the nervous energy radiating from her told me something significant was coming. She lit more Palo Santo, the smoke making my eyes water as she positioned herself across from me in the desk chair, her hands folded in her lap like she was about to deliver a prepared speech, which I soon realized was exactly what this was. Jordan, I need to share something profound that I discovered about myself in Sedona, she began, her voice taking on this practiced quality like she'd rehearsed these words multiple times. I met someone there who opened my eyes to possibilities I never knew existed, and through our connection, I've realized that I'm what's called relationship expansive, which means I have the capacity to love multiple people simultaneously without it diminishing what we have together. My brain struggled to process what she was saying while she continued, explaining how Zane, a tantric intimacy facilitator, had helped her understand that traditional marriage was just colonial programming designed to control women's sexuality and create artificial scarcity around love, and that humans were naturally polyamorous before society imposed monogamous structures on them. He's shown me that love isn't a finite resource that gets divided when shared, it multiplies, grows, becomes more abundant the more freely we give it, she said, her eyes shining with the fervor of someone who'd found a new religion, and I want to explore this connection with him while maintaining our marriage as what he calls a foundational anchor relationship, which would still be primary but not exclusive. I sat there in stunned silence for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, trying to comprehend that my wife of 10 years was essentially asking for permission to have an affair while keeping me as her backup plan, dressed up in spiritual terminology that somehow made it sound evolved rather than destructive. Nicole, we got married with the understanding that we'd be monogamous. That's literally what marriage means to me. To most people, it's the foundation of the commitment we made to each other, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the chaos in my chest, and I suggested we should see a marriage counselor if she was feeling unfulfilled or confused about what she wanted from our relationship. Her face immediately shifted from hopeful to frustrated, like I was a slow student failing to grasp a simple concept, and she leaned forward with this condescending patience that I'd never seen from her before. Jordan, jealousy is just an ego-based scarcity mindset. Zane has workshops on this. Actually, there's one next month on decolonizing relationships that would really help you understand. It's only $800 and I think it would be transformative for you to attend, she said, pulling out her phone to show me the website, apparently missing the irony of asking me to pay to learn why I should be okay with her sleeping with another man. The conversation took an even darker turn when she casually mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that she and Zane had already explored their connection physically twice during the conference, framing it as a natural extension of their spiritual work together rather than what it actually was, infidelity that she was now trying to retroactively justify with New Age philosophy. You're hurt because you're attached to an outdated model of love, Jordan. This is just your attachment trauma surfacing, and instead of sitting with that discomfort and growing through it, you're choosing to make me responsible for your emotional regulation, she said, using therapy language she'd clearly learned from Zane to weaponize against my completely reasonable response to being cheated on. I asked her point blank if she was really willing to end our marriage over someone she'd known for 4 days, and her response chilled me to my core. You're weaponizing our vows right now, using them as emotional manipulation to enforce monogamy on me when my soul is calling for expansion. That's not love, Jordan. That's control dressed up as commitment. While we were talking, I noticed her phone screen light up with a notification, and my stomach dropped when I saw it was from Facebook, showing that multiple people had reacted to a relationship status change. She'd already updated herself to "it's complicated" without even finishing our conversation. "Let me see your phone," I said, and she handed it over with this defiant pride, like she wanted me to see what she'd done, and there they were. Photos from Sedona with Zane's arm around her, his hand resting possessively on her hip while she gazed up at him with an expression I hadn't seen on her face in years. All hashtagged with #ConsciousLove, #RelationshipEvolution, #expanding-together, #beyond monogamy. Zane himself was exactly what I'd pictured from Nicole's description. Long hair in a man bun, carefully groomed beard, wearing multiple necklaces and bracelets just like the ones Nicole had come home with, shirtless in most photos to show off his yoga-toned body, with that practiced guru smile that probably worked on searching souls at wellness retreats but just looked predatory to me. "You've already made this public? Our friends, our families, everyone can see this?" I asked, scrolling through comments from confused mutual friends asking if we were okay, if this was some kind of joke, while Nicole's new, awakened collective friends posted heart emojis and messages about how brave she was for living her truth authentically. Nicole stood up then, pacing around the office with this manic energy, her crystals clicking together as she gestured wildly, building up to what I could tell was going to be an ultimatum. "Jordan, I need you to understand that staying in traditional monogamy would be spiritual suicide for me. I've awakened to who I really am, and I can't go back to sleep just because it makes you comfortable," she said, stopping directly in front of me. "So either you evolve with me into this new paradigm, maybe even find your own additional connections which could be beautiful for your growth, or I'll have to honor my authentic truth by leaving this marriage, because I can't keep pretending to be someone I'm not just to maintain an illusion of security." I looked at Nicole standing there with her ultimatum hanging between us like a loaded weapon, her eyes blazing with this righteous certainty that she was offering me enlightenment rather than destroying our marriage, and I felt an unexpected calm wash over me as I realized this was already over, had been over the moment she chose Zane over our anniversary, over our decade together. "You should pursue whatever makes you happy, Nicole, and I'll begin divorce proceedings since we clearly want different things from marriage, I said quietly, watching her face cycle through emotions as my words registered. First confusion, then shock, then something that looked almost like panic when she realized I wasn't going to beg or negotiate or fight for us. That's it? You're just giving up on 10 years? She asked, her voice rising with genuine bewilderment, like she'd been so certain I would either cave to her demands or desperately try to change her mind that my calm acceptance had completely derailed whatever script she'd been following. I stood up from the desk chair, feeling surprisingly steady despite the magnitude of what was happening, and told her simply that I wasn't giving up on anything. She had already ended our marriage when she slept with Zane. I was just acknowledging the reality she'd created and responding accordingly. That night I moved my clothes, laptop, and essential items to our guest suite, the room that had once been intended for the children we'd talked about having but never quite got around to, and as I made the bed with fresh sheets, I felt the weight of all those unmade futures, those paths we'd never walk together now. Nicole oscillated wildly between fury and manipulation over the next few hours, first storming into the guest room to accuse me of giving up on our marriage without even trying to understand her perspective, then later knocking softly and suggesting we could do a trial separation, where she would explore polyamory for 6 months while we remained legally married, keeping our finances joint and living arrangements intact, essentially wanting me to subsidize her experimentation with Zane while she decided if it was worth keeping me around. You could date too, she offered like she was being generous. Maybe you'll discover you're also polyamorous and we can explore this journey together, just at different paces, completely missing that I had zero interest in dating anyone while married, because unlike her, I actually believed in the vows we'd taken. I told her no, clearly and firmly. I wasn't interested in being her safety net, her backup plan, her foundational anchor, while she sailed off to explore other horizons, and if she wanted Zane and polyamory and spiritual expansion or whatever she was calling it this week, she was free to have all of that, just not while married to me. The next morning, I called my friend Marcus while Nicole was in the shower, and his response was exactly what I needed. Dude, I'm coming over right now, we're getting you a lawyer today, not tomorrow, not next week, today, because I've been through this and the longer you wait, the messier it gets. Marcus had divorced his wife 3 years earlier after she'd emptied their joint accounts to invest in her friend's essential oil MLM scheme, so he knew the playbook for protecting yourself when a spouse goes off the rails, and within hours he'd connected me with his attorney and helped me open separate bank accounts, transferring exactly half of our liquid savings before Nicole could drain them for whatever spiritual investment Zane might suggest. The attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia who'd seen every version of marital destruction imaginable, took notes as I explained the situation, occasionally raising her eyebrows at particularly outrageous details like Nicole already going public with her relationship status change. Document everything, Patricia advised, screenshots of those Facebook posts, any texts about Zane, any financial transactions she makes from joint accounts. Adultery is still grounds for at-fault divorce in this state, and from what you're describing, she's not even trying to hide it. By the time I got home that evening, Nicole had shifted tactics again, playing the victim, tears streaming down her face as she accused me of being emotionally violent, for moving money and betraying her trust, by involving lawyers, somehow making herself the injured party in a situation she'd created entirely on her own. Over the following 6 weeks, I watched from a distance as Nicole dismantled the life we'd built together piece by piece, each update coming through mutual friends who seemed equally shocked and confused by her transformation, their careful messages trying to remain neutral while clearly questioning what had possessed her to throw everything away. The first major shock came when our friend Sarah called me, her voice careful and concerned as she reported running into Nicole at the grocery store, but not our usual upscale market, the bulk discount place on the outskirts of town where Nicole used to mock people for shopping. Jordan, she looked exhausted, buying these huge bags of rice and beans, industrial-sized everything, and when I asked if you guys were hosting a party, she got this weird glazed look and started talking about feeding the family, and how she's part of an intentional community now, Sarah said, and I could hear the worry in her voice when she added that Nicole had tried to recruit her into something called Zane's Women's Empowerment Circle, which apparently required a $300 monthly membership for the privilege of learning about feminine sovereignty, and sacred sexuality. Through the gossip network that Nicole had once been so careful to cultivate and was now apparently oblivious to, I learned she'd moved into Zane's intentional community house, which turned out to be a rundown 5-bedroom rental on the wrong side of town where he lived with 3 other women, all of them referring to each other as soul family, while sharing one bathroom and splitting grocery costs down to the penny despite Zane somehow never contributing his share. The real gut punch came when I got an alert from our bank about a large withdrawal from our joint savings, $8,000, nearly all of what remained after I'd secured my half, transferred to someone named Ezra Williams, which Patricia discovered was Zane's legal name before his spiritual rebirth. Nicole had written investment in conscious living space renovation in the memo line, like that would somehow make it legitimate, and when Patricia's investigator looked into it, we discovered the money went toward Zane's latest business venture, a sacred sexuality retreat center that existed only as a website and an Instagram page full of stock photos of couples doing yoga on beaches. She's given him $8,000 for a business that doesn't exist, Patricia said, shaking her head as she added the documentation to our divorce file. This is textbook financial infidelity and dissipation of marital assets. The judge is going to have a field day with this. The most pathetic update came from Nicole's former coworker Janet, who told me Nicole had quit her corporate marketing job, the one she'd worked so hard to get, the one with actual benefits and a decent salary, because Zane had convinced her it was draining her life force and keeping her trapped in capitalism's death cult. Instead, she was now working part-time at Zane's existing wellness center, which turned out to be a converted garage where he taught tantric breathing workshops for $60 an hour, and Nicole was making minimum wage as his receptionist/assistant while calling it abundant living because she was rich in purpose rather than paper. Janet had tried to talk sense into her when Nicole came to clean out her desk, but Nicole had just smiled with this eerie calm and said, "You wouldn't understand, Janet. You're still trapped in the matrix of conventional success metrics. I'm measuring my life in joy and expansion now, not dollars and titles." The details that trickled in painted an increasingly disturbing picture. Nicole doing all the cooking and cleaning for the house while Zane meditated, Nicole recruiting her friends for his various workshops and getting angry when they declined, Nicole posting increasingly unhinged social media content about leveling up and quantum leaping, while her photos showed her looking progressively thinner and more worn down. Marcus came over one evening with beer and pulled up Nicole's Instagram on his phone, both of us staring at this woman who looked like my wife but acted like a stranger, posting quotes about sacred union and conscious relating, while her eyes looked hollow and desperate in every photo despite her forced smile. "This is a cult, man," Marcus said bluntly. "I mean, it's a sex cult with crystals and yoga pants instead of robes and compounds, but it's still a cult. One dude, multiple women, financial exploitation, isolation from friends and family, special knowledge that only they understand. Check, 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 and check." I knew he was right, but knowing that didn't make it hurt less to see the intelligent, ambitious woman I'd married reduced to a servant in some narcissist's harem, paying for the privilege of being manipulated while thinking she was evolving spiritually. The first desperate text came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, 2 months after Nicole had moved out, just 3 words that made my phone buzz on the nightstand. "Are you awake?" I stared at it for a long moment before deleting it and going back to sleep, but by morning there were 17 more messages, each one increasingly frantic and revealing more about the nightmare her conscious living had become. "Jordan, please answer me. I need to talk to someone outside of this situation," read one, followed by, "I think I made a terrible mistake," and "Zane isn't who I thought he was," and finally, desperately, "I'm scared and I don't know how to leave." Over the next 2 weeks, the texts came in waves, usually late at night when I imagined Zane was asleep or with one of the other women, and through these messages I pieced together the horrifying reality of life in his intentional community, which operated more like a competition for his attention than the loving family Nicole had been promised. "There's a hierarchy here," she wrote one night. "Astrid has been with him longest, so she's primary. Then comes Luna, who joined 6 months ago, then Rebecca, who got here right before me, and I'm at the bottom, doing most of the housework while getting the least time with him, and when I complained, he said I was showing spiritual immaturity, and needed to work on my jealousy issues through more service to the household. The women weren't the supportive sisters she'd expected but rivals constantly undermining each other for Zayn's approval, reporting on each other's negative energy or resistance to growth, creating an environment where Nicole couldn't trust anyone and spent her days walking on eggshells, terrified of being criticized in their nightly circle of truth sessions where Zayn would pit them against each other under the guise of radical honesty. "He has us compete for who can bring in the most money from recruiting," she texted. "Whoever recruits the most new members to his workshops gets to sleep in his room that week while the others share the basement. And if we don't meet our quotas, he says we're not committed to the mission and threatens to replace us with someone who understands abundance." The financial exploitation was even worse than I'd imagined. Not only were they all contributing to household expenses while Zayn contributed nothing, but they were also expected to recruit for his various programs, essentially working as unpaid salespeople for his seminars, and any money they earned from their outside jobs went into a community fund that Zayn controlled completely. The most disturbing revelation came in a series of rapid-fire texts sent at 3 a.m. "Jordan, he's been recording us, all of us, when we're intimate with him, without consent, and selling the videos on some subscriber website, calling it sacred sexuality education, but it's basically porn," and when Rebecca found out and confronted him, he gaslit her so badly she ended up apologizing to him for violating his privacy by looking at his laptop. Nicole had discovered this when she tried to use Zayn's computer to check her email and found folders with each woman's name containing dozens of videos, plus financial records showing he was making thousands of dollars a month from selling their most intimate moments to strangers on the internet while the women lived on rice and beans. "He has over 50,000 in his personal account while telling us we need to embrace scarcity to understand abundance," she wrote. "And yesterday he bought himself a new motorcycle while telling me I was being materialistic for asking for $20 to get a proper winter coat from the thrift store." She tried to leave twice, she admitted, but each time Zayn had convinced her she was self-sabotaging her spiritual journey, and the other women had surrounded her with what they called love bombing, but was really peer pressure and emotional manipulation, making her feel guilty for abandoning the family and giving up on her evolution until she stayed out of exhaustion and confusion. "I'm so isolated," read one particularly heartbreaking message. "I haven't talked to my parents in months because Zayn says they're low vibrational. I've lost all my real friends because I kept trying to recruit them. I have no money because it all goes to the house, no car because I sold it to contribute to the community, no job prospects because I quit my career, and I'm too ashamed to ask anyone for help because I know how stupid I've been." The final text in that 2-week period was the shortest but most impactful. "You were right about everything. I destroyed us for a con artist. I need to come home." I didn't respond immediately to Nicole's plea, instead forwarding the messages to Patricia and spending a week with my therapist processing the complex mix of emotions, vindication that I'd been right, anger at what she'd put us through, pity for what she was experiencing, and a deep sadness for the woman I'd once loved who'd let herself be so thoroughly destroyed. After 7 days of silence, I finally agreed to meet her at a coffee shop near my office, choosing a public location during my lunch break to keep clear boundaries, both temporal and emotional, around whatever conversation we were about to have. When Nicole walked through the door, I had to stop myself from gasping at her transformation. She'd lost at least 20 pounds from her already slim frame, her hair was unwashed and pulled back in a messy ponytail, her clothes hung off her body like she'd borrowed them from someone else, and her eyes had the hollow, haunted look of someone who'd been through sustained psychological trauma. She started crying before she even sat down, reaching for my hands across the table with desperate urgency, and I let her hold them for a moment before gently pulling back, the physical boundary as important as the emotional one I was maintaining. "Jordan, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry," she sobbed, her voice breaking on every word. "I was an idiot. I threw away everything real for a fantasy, for a predator who knew exactly how to manipulate me, and I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but please, please, I need your help." She launched into a detailed confession of how Zayn operated, how he'd identified her at the conference as someone with money and insecurity, love-bombed her with attention and false wisdom, isolated her from anyone who might question his influence, then systematically broken down her sense of self until she was completely dependent on his approval. "He's not even really polyamorous," she said with bitter laugh through her tears. "He just uses it as a cover for having a harem of women who pay all his bills and do all his work while he sits around getting high and talking about consciousness. It's not about expanded love, it's about expanded exploitation, and I fell for it completely." She revealed more disturbing details: how he would pit the women against each other constantly, playing favorites to create competition, how he would withdraw affection as punishment for questioning him, how he would use their recorded intimate moments as blackmail if anyone tried to leave, threatening to send the videos to their families and employers. "I tried to leave twice," she repeated, her hands shaking as she lifted her coffee cup, "but both times he convinced me I was having a spiritual crisis, that leaving would mean I'd failed my journey, and the other women, God, they surrounded me with this fake concern that was really just pressure to stay, telling me I was being weak, that I needed to push through the resistance, that leaving would destroy the family we'd built." Nicole looked at me then with such raw desperation that despite everything, I felt my heart crack just a little for the broken person in front of me who barely resembled my confident, successful wife of just months ago. I finally got out when he went to another conference to recruit new women. I literally ran away with just my purse while the others were at the grocery store, walked 5 miles to a library, and used their computer to message you because he monitors all our phones, she explained, and I realized those late-night texts had been even more dangerous for her to send than I'd imagined. She begged me then, really begged, promising she'd do anything to fix our marriage. "I'll go to therapy, individual and couples, I'll get a new job, I'll never speak to anyone from that world again, I'll sign a postnup, I'll give you all my passwords, I'll do whatever it takes to prove I've learned my lesson and that you, us, our marriage, that's what's real, that's what matters, not some toxic fantasy sold by a manipulative narcissist." Her hand reached across the table again, trembling as she tried to take mine, and when I pulled back, she left her hand there in the middle of the table, palm up, like she was offering everything she had left, which wasn't much. "Jordan, please, I know I destroyed everything, but I was brainwashed, actually brainwashed. He used real cult tactics on me, on all of us, and I'm not saying that excuses what I did to you, to us, but maybe it explains it? Maybe we can find our way back from this?" she pleaded, her voice rising with desperation. "You're the only real thing I had, the only person who actually loved me, not what I could provide or how I could serve, but me, and I threw it away for an illusion, for smoke and crystals and empty promises, and I'll spend the rest of my life regretting it if you'll just give me one more chance." I let her finish, let her pour out all her regret and desperation, then reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the envelope I'd been carrying for this exact moment, sliding it across the table with the same calm I'd maintained since she'd first mentioned Zane's name. "These are the divorce papers, Nicole. You should have your lawyer review them, though I think you'll find them more than fair given the circumstances," I said quietly, watching her face crumble as she realized I wasn't going to be her salvation, her escape route back to stability. Nicole stared at the envelope like it was a death sentence, her hands shaking as she pushed it back toward me untouched, then launched into increasingly desperate arguments that cycled from tearful apologies to promises of change to accusations that I was being cruel and unforgiving. "How can you do this to me when I'm at my lowest?" she cried, her voice rising enough that other patrons started glancing our way. "I was manipulated by a predator, Jordan. I was literally in a cult. Don't you understand that? If you ever loved me at all, you'd help me heal from this, not abandon me when I need you most." I maintained my composure despite her escalating emotion, explaining calmly that while I was genuinely sorry for what she'd experienced with Zane, she hadn't accidentally fallen into that situation. She had actively chosen it, defended it, publicly humiliated me for not being evolved enough to accept it, and destroyed our marriage in pursuit of it. "You didn't wake up in Zane's house confused about how you got there," I said firmly. "You walked out of our home, our marriage, our life together with your eyes wide open because you thought you'd found something better, and the fact that it turned out to be a lie doesn't erase the choices you made or the damage you caused." She tried another angle then, switching from victim to angry, accusing me of being cold and vindictive, saying that my refusal to forgive her showed I'd never really loved her, that real love meant supporting someone through their mistakes, not abandoning them at their first moment of weakness. First moment of weakness? I repeated, unable to keep the incredulity out of my voice. Nicole, you cheated on me, announced you were polyamorous, gave our savings to your boyfriend, quit your job, publicly humiliated me on social media, and told me I wasn't evolved enough to understand real love. That's not a moment of weakness, that's a complete betrayal of everything we built together. The conversation grew more surreal as she cycled through every manipulation tactic she'd probably learned from watching Zayn work, trying to find the combination that would unlock my sympathy and get her what she wanted: stability, security, and someone to rescue her from the consequences of her choices. "You're really going to let me become homeless?" she asked with calculated desperation. "Because that's what'll happen. I have nowhere to go, no money, no job, nothing, and you're just going to watch me sink?" I pulled out a second piece of paper I'd prepared, sliding it across the table with the same calm deliberation as the divorce papers. "This is contact information for a women's shelter that specializes in helping people exit coercive relationships, and below that is a therapist who works specifically with cult survivors. I've already paid for 3 sessions to help you get started," I explained, watching her face process this gesture that was both helpful and final. "I want you to get help, Nicole, real professional help to understand what happened to you and why you were vulnerable to it, but I'm not responsible for rescuing you from the life you chose. You're an adult who made adult decisions, and while I have sympathy for the manipulation you experienced, it doesn't obligate me to sacrifice my own well-being to save you from consequences." She initially pushed the paper away with disgust, her face twisting with rage as she realized I was offering practical help rather than reconciliation, but I left it on the table between us like a life raft she could choose to grab or ignore. "This isn't love," she spat, her voice venomous now that she realized manipulation wasn't working. "Love is forgiveness. Love is second chances. Love is fighting through the hard times together, not abandoning someone when they make one mistake." I stood up then, knowing this conversation had reached its natural end, that nothing I said would penetrate the wall of denial and entitlement she'd built around herself to avoid taking full responsibility for her choices. "Love is also respect, Nicole, and you showed me none when you decided our marriage was just colonial programming to be discarded for something shinier," I said, putting on my jacket with deliberate calm. "I do wish you well, genuinely, and I hope you get the help you need to understand how you ended up here, but I'm not going to set myself on fire to keep you warm. That pattern ends today." As I walked toward the door, she called after me one last time, her voice breaking with genuine anguish. "Jordan, please, I love you. I've always loved you. I just got confused, lost, manipulated. Doesn't that count for anything?" I paused at the door and looked back at her one final time, this broken woman who'd once been my wife, my partner, my future, and said the truest thing I could: "It counts for exactly what it's worth," a lesson learned and a chapter closed. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized with Nicole getting less than she'd hoped but more than she deserved, Patricia having negotiated brilliantly using the documentation of adultery and financial mismanagement, and I heard through Sarah that Nicole had actually gone to therapy, gotten a job at a nonprofit, and was slowly rebuilding her life away from Zayn's influence. I'd moved to a better apartment downtown, one with a view of the mountains I'd always wanted but Nicole had thought was too expensive, reconnected with old friends I'd neglected during the marriage, started dating again with very clear boundaries and expectations from the beginning, and discovered that life after betrayal could actually be fuller and more authentic than the life I'd been living before. I occasionally wondered if Nicole had really learned from her experience or if she was just waiting for the next Zayn to come along with promises of transformation and transcendence, but I'd made peace with not knowing. My closure came from choosing myself, from refusing to be anyone's backup plan or safety net, from understanding that someone else's growth wasn't my responsibility to fund, emotionally or otherwise.